The film you are about to see is narrated by a Palestinian journalist. It shows how UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, is financing school curriculums that glorify terror and suicide bombing. Children are being inoculated with the belief that any and all means possible, including violence, must be used to reclaim Palestine, which for them means all of Israel. The United States is one of the major sources of funding for this work, and therefore, indirectly, is helping to produce a generation of children for whom the armed struggle to liberate Palestine is central to their lives. For 60 years, UNRWA has operated the camps and even now wants to continue the status quo. For the Palestinians, what does that mean? Another 60 years of a hopeless existence in camps with no solution in sight? But that's not the end of the story. This film will take you to Chile. There, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, which handles refugees from all over the world, has launched a pilot project to resettle 20,000 Palestinian refugees. Once stuck in Iraq, they are now in Chile, where a life of hope is being held out for a new generation of Palestinians. Wars in the Middle East may not have easy solutions. Still, the message of this film is that there is a humanitarian solution to the continuing scar of Palestinian refugee camp existence.
Hello, my name is Sarah Masad, and I want to tell you about life as a Palestinian with UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Work Agency. UNRWA was founded as a temporary organization 60 years ago after the Arab-Israeli War in 1948. UNRWA was established to help refugees deal with their temporary plight in the wake of that war. It was never intended to become a permanent refugee agency. 60 years ago, UNRWA fed anywhere from 450,000 to 750,000 refugees from the 1948 war. That was an important act of kindness. But instead of working to resettle Palestinians, it has become a permanent agency, always encouraging Palestinians to return to their villages, even though they no longer exist. This policy has turned into a fantasy and has served as a collective punishment to good, hardworking people like myself. We want the opportunity that others in a democracy might have to find meaningful work, provide a good education to our children, and instill proper ideals and family values. Instead, we have become locked in a battle between the Palestinian nationalism and UNRWA's inability to effect real change in its camps.
The number of Palestinian refugees keeps growing as UNRWA continues to grow. UNRWA recognizes not only the original Arabs who claim to have been displaced, but their descendants as well. Now, the number of people on the UNRWA rolls has grown to more than 4 million. They live in and near 59 UNRWA camps in the West Bank, Gaza, Jerusalem, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. With 38 democracies across the globe contributing, UNRWA has an annual budget of more than $1 billion. In recent years, its budget has ballooned, with the U.S. and EU each contributing more than $260 million a year. Other major donors include Canada, Japan, Norway, and Australia. But since 1950, the U.S. has been the largest single donor. While UNRWA is responsible for the camp's education, health, relief, and social service programs, it leaves the day-to-day operations to local Palestinians known as popular committees, who operate inside the UNRWA facilities. Meanwhile, UNRWA spends about half of its budget each year, more than $500 million, on schools. It has a massive payroll, employing more than 22,000 educators. UNRWA does not produce its own textbooks. Its policy is to adopt the texts and curriculum of the host entity. In the West Bank and Gaza, it uses new textbooks and course guidelines produced and utilized by the Palestinian Authority.
Over the years, life here has changed, and much of it has to do with strict adherence to Islamic law. As you can see, I'm wearing a hijab, or a head covering, which is now the custom of Palestinian Muslim women.
Violence in UNRWA camps can often be traced to Islamic militancy, with groups like Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade openly calling for young children to sacrifice themselves as Islamic martyrs. Thousands of members of these radical Islamic groups are now employed by UNRWA. Even the Teachers Union in Gaza, almost 10,000 educators, is openly affiliated with Hamas, and some have called for the children to become suicide bombers. Still, even now, UNRWA denies that Hamas workers are on its payroll.
It's another false allegation without any evidence to substantiate it. It's part of the destructive rhetoric of this conflict, which does no justice to anybody who has any interest in trying to promote a peaceful resolution to this conflict. We at UNRWA are transparent and accountable.
Hamas as a political organization does not mean that every member is a militant, and we do not do political vetting and exclude people from one persuasion as against another.
Hamas Education Minister Mohammed Askul confirmed that Hamas members work for UNRWA.
الإنسان الفلسطيني المنتمي لحماس منتشر في كل المؤسسات.
No doubt that in Gaza they have a lot of employees from the Hamas, because that was one of the demands of the Hamas government. If you are not going to accept our members as an employees, we will kick you out tomorrow morning. Then UNRWA, in terms to survive, they accept such kind of condition, because they want to continue their activities, they want to continue corrupting the Palestinians, they want to continue surviving on the Palestinian cause, so they accept such kind of condition.
Also, it now appears that UNRWA is breaking U.S. law by investing its funds with the Arab Bank and the Commercial Bank of Syria. The U.S. believes these financial institutions are complicit in money laundering and terror financing. Just who has been working in UNRWA schools? People like Saeed Sayyam, the former Hamas Minister of Interior and Civil Affairs. He taught for 23 years.
قدم فيه حماس الشهداء حتى هذه الساعة في القطاع دفاعا عن أرضنا وشعبنا.
Then there is Awad Al-Kik, the ex-headmaster of an UNRWA school in Gaza. He led the Islamic Jihad engineering unit that built bombs and Qassam rockets. After his death, UNRWA students praised his memory at their school.
أبا محمد عشت مربيا فاضلا ورحلت مجاهدا قائدا أبا محمد.
And then there's Suhail Al-Hindi, head of the UNRWA Teachers Union in Gaza. Al-Hindi brought former Hamas leader Sheikh Yassin, who also served as an UNRWA teacher, to an UNRWA school to lecture about suicide bombing and martyrdom. This is what Al-Hindi told students. The road to Palestine runs through the blood of our martyrs. To get a better understanding of UNRWA, we met with UNRWA representative Christopher Gunnis to discuss UNRWA operations.
What's the most important service UNRWA provides?
You have to ask the refugees that question. It's easy for me to answer. I would say education, because through our education, we educate 500,000 children in the Arab countries and territories on the borders of Israel. That means in UNRWA's hands is the ability to educate the next generation of children who will be living in countries around Israel.
If education is one of the core missions of UNRWA, it appears that the next generation of UNRWA graduates will be espousing anything but peace with their neighbor Israel.
When we visited UNRWA schools and camps across the West Bank and Gaza, teachers and students expressed a collective voice that suggested that only through renewed violence would they be able to attain their goal, the destruction of Israel. While UNRWA denies that any of its work has led to violence, its offices and schools sit side by side with what could only be called a culture of war. Perhaps the most striking example of this culture is in UNRWA's schools. In Gaza and the West Bank, nearly 10,000 teachers and school administrators employed by UNRWA belong to Hamas-dominated unions, which call for the destruction of Israel. Inside the schools, teachers adhere to a curriculum that inculcates anti-Israel teachings at every level. Students are taught that all of Israel is occupied Palestinian land, and Israelis are portrayed as snakes and murderers. Zionism is described as a racist movement. The armed struggle is an important part of the students' lessons. We shall return. We shall return. We shall return to the homes, to the valleys, to the mountains, under the flags of glory, jihad, and struggle, with blood, sacrifice, fraternity, and loyalty. In public, UNRWA distributes glossy folders and informational packets extolling the virtues of its work with refugees. But there's no mention of the 41 former UNRWA students who became suicide bombers and killed 83 people and injured 436. One former UNRWA student who tried to become an Islamic martyr was Wafa El-Bas. After being badly burned in 2005, she was brought to an Israeli hospital in Beersheba. 2 months after she was first treated, she returned to the hospital with an explosive belt strapped to her body. But before she got to the hospital, she was apprehended by Israeli security. She is now in prison.
ما حسيتش بالخوف، ما شعرتش ان انا مثلا خايفه، شعرت براحه شديده لان انا رايحه الاقي ربنا وراح استشهد وراح اعمل شيء في سبيل الله يعني. ما شعرتش باي شيء الا براحه يعني تامه.
كنتي فرحانه؟
كثير فرحانه. وراضيه عن نفسي جدا يعني، لاني كنت بدي هيك اشوف الشهداء، اروح على الجنه وهيك اشياء وارض ربنا بالنهايه.
شو كان في راسك جوا في راسك لما سكرتي عينيكي وشفتي شو كان في راسك؟
تخيلت حالي في الجنه، تخيلت حالي بين الشهداء، تخيلت حالي بين الانهار والحور العين وهيك حاجات. يعني كان شعوري مرتاحه جدا وانا برتدي في الحزام الناسف، لان كان عندي مبدا اني احاول اقتل اكبر عدد من اليهود، يعني هيك تكون يعني عدد كثير من اليهود قتلى هيك.
A visit to UNRWA schools and camps confirms that martyrdom is still extolled in the most public places. At the UNRWA Dehesha refugee camp elementary school near Bethlehem, students pass by murals of several suicide bombers every day in front of the school. One prominent suicide bomber was Ayat El-Ahras, a former UNRWA student. In 2002, the 18-year-old girl blew herself up at a Jerusalem supermarket. 2 people were killed. One was Rachel Levy, an 18-year-old girl who grew up in America. Here, the former UNRWA student pledges that the Intifada will continue until victory.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنا شهيد الحي آيات محمد لطف الأخرس، أقوم بعملي هذا خالصا لوجه الله العلي القدير، وأقول للحكام العرب: كفاكم نوما وكفاكم تخاذلا وتقاعسا عن أداء الواجب تجاه فلسطين وأقصاه وفلسطين الله أكبر والله أكبر على الظالمين وإنها لانتفاضة حتى النصر الشهيدة آيات محمد لطفي الأخرس.
In recent years, more and more evidence shows that militants have all but taken over UNRWA.
For decades, armed militants have operated openly in UNRWA camps. Even more than 20 years ago, UNRWA was aware that its students were participating in riots and even helped coordinate their actions. Meet Zakaria Zabeidi. A graduate of the UNRWA school in Jenin, Zabeidi rose through the ranks to become the leader of the most violent terrorist organization in the West Bank. As the head of the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades in Jenin, he was the most wanted man in the West Bank and dispatched suicide bombers and terror gangs.
كان وظيفتي كالتالي انه التنسيق ما بين اداره المدرسه والطلاب في موضوع المظاهرات والخروج من المدرسه والدخول عليها.
These days, on the streets of the refugee camps, UNRWA students speak openly about becoming martyrs. 2 8th graders said that dying for their country is the duty of a Palestinian.
لازم يلحق الشهادة ويلحق النصر يكون مع الشهداء والصديقين وينصر إخواننا المسلمين ويدافع عن أرضه.
هذول أنا بعتبرهم أبطال عند ربنا وعند عند الفلسطينية عشان بسوي المستحيل عشان أرجع بلادي.
In Gaza, an UNRWA student stood next to a Hamas leader and declared his right to liberate Palestine. In the Shuafat UNRWA camp in East Jerusalem, Palestinian parliament member Jihad Abu Znaid held an impromptu class on a street.
شو الدور بدك تلعبه عشان تحرر فلسطين؟ شو ايش بتلاقي حالك كيف؟
نحارب فلسطين.
We want to fight.
نحارب عشان نرجع بلدنا.
كيف؟
مش مبسوط.
He said guns. ايش كمان؟
بالحكي.
By talking. By talking مع مين تحكي؟
بالحجار.
By stones. Okay, he mean civic.
بالسلاح.
By guns.
بالصواريخ.
صواريخ. We don't have ما عندناش صواريخ ولا RPG.
لا بندبر.
When we met with Palestinian Education Minister Lamis Al-Alami to ask her about what UNRWA is teaching about Israel, she denied that Israel was even part of the curriculum.
Are you teaching about Israel now?
No, we're not.
You're not teaching? Not really?
No.
For the last several years, Dr. Arnon Groys, a Jerusalem professor, has conducted an intensive examination of Palestinian textbooks. Groys believes that Palestinians have created a curriculum for war.
The parameters of Palestinian textbooks, I mean the line or the goal or the mission of Palestinian education is that there is denial of legitimacy, demonized description of the other, and no peace with the other is advocated. Now, non-recognition, demonization, no peace advocacy, emphasis on armed struggle for liberation with no geographical limit, all that make a curriculum of suspended war. It is not a curriculum for peace.
But Al-Alami praised the textbooks and school curriculum.
I must say that in the first place, it's a Palestinian curriculum, and we're free
to do with it whatever we want, whatever we feel is important. I mean, when the Palestinian curriculum was designed, I think the people in charge did an excellent job because they researched, most of the curricula in the Arab world. They looked at, European models and others, and came up, with the curriculum that suits our needs. So it was not haphazardly done. And I think, with the Palestinians, they have long experience in education, and everybody knows that.
Over the years, the curriculum has become more and more militant.
أكيد في فرق بين مين هو المعلم اللي بيعلمهم، قناعته. يعني إذا هو بده يتعلم من يعني أشخاص بيميلوا لإطار ديني معين، فبالتالي بيعتبر إسرائيل هي دولة لازم تزول.
This feeling is shared by many residents in UNRWA camps.
أهم شيء عندنا بحياتنا إن إحنا نحلم حلم وبنعمل جاهدين إن نرجع لبلادنا، لأنه الحياة في داخل هذا المخيم لا تعني إلا ولا شيء. هي بنعتبرها مرحلة بحياتنا رايحة تنتهي آجلا أم عاجلا، وإحنا من حتم إن نرجع لبلادنا بأي وسيلة من الوسائل، نثبت حقنا أن هاي البلاد اللي هي تهجرنا منها وتدمرت هي بلادنا، وليس تمت بأي صلة لليهود إلا من قريب أو من بعيد.
Some even think Palestinians should be able to gain access to atomic weapons.
الحرب بتطور، الدنيا بتتطور. امبارح بقينا نحارب بالسيف، بعدين صارت برودة، بعدين صارت مدفع، بعدين صارت طيارة، بعدين اليوم نووي. إن الله قدرنا إن احنا نقدر نراجع زي ما هم بيحذروا في نووي بنحذر نووي.
But not everyone agrees with UNRWA and the Palestinian leaders. Back in the early 1970s, Israel built houses for Palestinians outside the UNRWA camps, but they were threatened by camp leaders who told them they had to remain. Now people like Bassam Aid think it is time to stop funding UNRWA and close the agency. Aid grew up in an UNRWA refugee camp and has watched as the agency has hired more and more militant Islamic employees, while its curriculum has become increasingly militant. He is now director of the Palestinian Human Rights Monitoring Group.
The main goal and the main aim of UNRWA, how to keep such refugee status for as a permanent issue forever. And that makes the people so frustrated and so tired from UNRWA organization.
Inside the UNRWA camps, many other residents agree and say they're receiving fewer services than ever.
كنا ما ندفعش ولا كهرباء ولا مي، كنا نشرب المي على حساب الوكالة. اليوم احنا بندفع المي وبندفع الكهرباء وبندفع كل شيء. ايش بدي في خدماتها؟ ما بتلزمنيش خدماتها حاليا، الايام هذه ما بتلزمني خدماتها. بلزمنا الوكالة تيجي تقول بس انه وقفنا.
Meanwhile, when we visited one UNRWA school, we found the conditions deplorable.
What worries me is that in the long term, UNRWA is not offering any solution, and it's sort of doing maintenance for the refugee camps, keeping them where they are. I don't see UNRWA offering any solutions or alternatives to these poor people. UNRWA is not involved in trying to find them any houses or even in building houses for them in other places. So what we see is a sort of maintenance for these refugee camps, and it's sort of perpetuating the problem by keeping these refugees where they are. UNRWA, in many ways, is actually paying the refugees to stay where they are and to stay refugees.
One option that many are now suggesting is that the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees take over UNRWA. The High Commissioner already resettles refugees across the globe, and this branch of the UN has experience resettling Palestinians. In recent years, thousands of Palestinian refugees who lived in makeshift camps in Iraq have found new homes and jobs because of the High Commissioner. They now live in several countries, including Chile.
Chilean government and later on civil society opened the door to this group of refugees.
يعني أنا فرحان كثير لأنها جتني يعني الحمد لله إنه الله رزقني ببنت أو ولد يعني الحمد لله والشكر اثنينهم نفس الإشي قامت بالسلامة والبنت اجت بخير وبسلامة وكاملة الخلقة زين والفرحة الثانية إنها انولدت يعني إنه في بلد زي أختها مريم انولدت في المخيم هي انولدت وأتمنى إنهم يحنوا علينا ويعطونا الجنسية على ضوء بنتي يعني زين بنتي تشيلانية يعني أول بنت تشيلانية تيجي فلسطينية هون.
I want to get the good future and safety and get the nationality.
You want to become a Chilean?
Yes, yes, because in here I see a good people, a good country. No one wanted us, just Chile.
That is an inspiring story. That's one UN agency that does the job and provides real humanitarian assistance to our people. We need dignity and respect and a life that we can look forward to. Is that too much to ask for?